Welcome. I'm Reena Aggarwal, Robert E. McDonough Professor of Finance and Director of the Georgetown Center for Financial Markets and Policy. March is Women's History Month, and the Georgetown Center has organized a number of events to celebrate and mark this special month. Today, we are delighted to continue our Women Leaders in Business and Finance series. Two terrific students from the McDonough School of Business, Leena Jube and Lauren Gibson, they're going to interview our guests today. We are absolutely honored to have and welcome Afsaneh Beschloss. Ms. Beschloss is the co-founder and CEO of RockCreek Group, a leading global investment firm. Previously, she was managing director and partner at the Carlyle Group. And before that, Treasurer and Chief Investment Officer of the World Bank. In addition to being on the Georgetown University Board of Directors, Ms. Beschloss is also on the boards of the Council of Foreign Relations, the World Resources Institute, the American Red Cross, and the Vice Chair of Public Broadcasting Service. She is a recipient of several awards, including the Institutional Investor Lifetime Achievement Award and the Robert F. Kennedy Ripple of Hope Award. She has been recognized as one of American bankers' most powerful women in banking, and by Barron's amongst the 100 most influential women in US finance. The recording of today's interviews will be available on the center's website. Our earlier interview with Mary Erdos of JP Morgan is already available on the center's website. Afsaneh, we are delighted to have you as part of the Center for Financial Markets and Policy's Women Leaders in Finance and Business series. Now I'm going to hand it over to our wonderful students, Leena and Lauren. Take it away. Thank you.
Wow, what a resume. That is amazing. Thank you so much for being here and speaking with us. We are extremely excited to learn from you and your experiences. We'll do a bit of introductions. My name is Leena Jube. I'm a second-year MBA about to be graduating, which blows my mind how fast time flies. Prior to business school, I worked in brand management at Unilever, growing brands like Dove and Ben & Jerry's. And I absolutely loved it. But at that point in my career, you don't know what you don't know. As I imagine through all of your career changes, you kind of get a sense of that. And I wanted to go back and really learn and build my breadth of knowledge across different industries and then hone in on different areas of development. So in that endeavor, I'll actually be heading to consulting at Deloitte full-time come this fall, and I'm really excited about it. And I credit a lot of it, my experience at Georgetown, for sort of driving that decision. And during my 2 years here, I've been able to serve as the VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, a student ambassador. And this past summer, I actually had the distinct opportunity to work with the Center for Financial Markets in writing a white paper about potential solutions for the challenges that many private equity firms face in ESG reporting. And as you know, as you try to demonstrate the full impact of your investments, how do you do that with better and better metrics? And so it's definitely been a journey for me, and I'm really excited to start this conversation with you. But before that, I'll hand it off to Lauren to introduce herself.
Thanks, Leena. So hello, my name is Lauren Gibson. I am a first-year MBA interested in financial technology. But I come actually from a background in teaching English abroad and also working on the IT side of an accounts receivables product. But working in these various industries, I realized that I wanted to return to school so that I could better my business knowledge and to get more into the where the decisions are being made. So at Georgetown, I am the co-president of the FinTech Club, and I currently work with the Center for Financial Markets and Policy, helping to write summaries of the various research papers that the center releases. And I'm just very excited to also interview you and be a woman in this financial services space so that we can encourage more women to be leaders in this. So thank you. And one of the first questions we do have is on the private sector. And we wanted to ask you, Ms. Beschloss, if you could tell us a bit about your career path in the private sector, in the World Bank, and then how you started at RockCreek in 2002.
I'm really, really delighted to be with you today. I wanted to thank Reena for that incredibly generous and kind introduction, and also to thank Leena and Lauren for being here today. I expect that I will be the recipient of learning on this conversation today. And as you well know, the world is changing so fast, and you and your other students who are listening to this are really at the cusp of such a historical time where the intersection between technology, between health, education, finance, financial inclusion, climate is all coming together in a way that really pre-COVID was kind of disparate. So we're very fortunate to be together today, but I think that I'm so excited about where you all are in your careers. And I think that the options that are open today are just incredible, just as we heard what Leena's going to be doing. And I'm sure Lauren will be following with even more interesting things. And I'll sort of say a few words about my journey and history in the private sector, but let me just mention that when I studied as an economist and originally was studying and teaching economics at Oxford, the last thing I thought is that I would end up in the private sector. I thought I would go into academia. I thought I would be in the public sector. There was a revolution in the country I was born. There were all kinds of other things that happened in life, and it changed, my path. So I don't think that you can ever rely on this sort of single plan. And that's how I ended up in my first job, actually, at JP Morgan. And it was a very different time, a different place. JP Morgan was one of the most team-oriented, most open, transparent teams. And actually, we might have even had a really good share of women in our training program at that point. They didn't have diversity factors or anything like that, but just naturally, there was a lot of people from diverse backgrounds. So fast forward, you were asking about my more recent journey. So having worked at the World Bank, where while I worked in the public sector, it was really most of the time working in two areas, very closely bringing private and public sectors together. And that has been, I think, the most interesting part of the journey. So I had one career at the World Bank, the early part of it, which was in energy. And eventually I ran the bank's energy business, started, by the way, from, what they call young professional program, and then started working in traditional energy, and then got very interested in natural gas, as I had been while I was at Oxford, and then moved into eventually doing a lot of the policy work in emerging markets on energy, as well as doing a lot of investing in solar, wind, geothermal, and other forms of clean energy. And that was kind of early and so that was really important. The second part of my career was to do finance. And I, again, went to the trading floor of the World Bank, learned about fixed income trading from scratch, so at the bottom, and then learned, again, sort of skills on the derivative side. Bank had a huge portfolio of swaps, had done the first currency swap ever. And so learned a lot from a lot of my quantitative colleagues, and eventually became chief investment officer and treasurer of the World Bank, responsible for its whole balance sheet, how we did, the rating of the World Bank, which is a AAA rated, etc. Why do I mention all of these things? Because in each of my jobs there, it was really, if you're working on energy, how do you bring public resources from a multilateral together with private resources from private companies, and who were even at that point not as interested in solar and wind as there is today. Similarly, in finance, we were working to leverage resources into emerging markets. So not only our lending from the World Bank, but leverage other resources to development of their capital markets, helping them do bond issues, including later on, as you know, one of my colleagues with me did some of the early social bonds and things like that. So the thing that sort of stands out in my career is that I, one, was okay with change. Two, I worked with a lot of very smart people who were much smarter than me, and I tried to learn from them. And three, I was willing, as things, you know, for example, energy at one point, while it was so important to me, suddenly got sidestepped at the World Bank. So I could have fought and just stayed in an area which at that point was declining, believe it or not. You know, it's hard to think today that solar and wind were declining, but they were in the early 90s, sadly. And so I went to finance. And now it's really interesting, as you were saying, going to Carlisle, where from the World Bank, I had, you know, been investing in private companies in emerging markets. I had been investing in public companies. I had been doing fixed income. I'd been investing across lots of asset classes, and being in a small partnership, going from a big, massive organization where I managed hundreds and hundreds of people to a very small group where I had to build out from scratch was really exciting. Again, you know, I do encourage everyone to try. See what kind of environment do you like? Do you like to work in very large environments? And I think for MBA students, this is always a big question. Do you go to a big company? Do you go and start your own business? And I have sort of tried both. And I, by the way, love both. So, and I think the reason when I came to RockCreek and started RockCreek as a very small company, which is now grown to about 16 billion in assets, with working with some of the biggest institutions, universities, pension plans, sovereign funds, and others, is that the reason we have succeeded, I think, is because of those experiences. If I had not done the public-private, you know, work together, if I had not learned from some of the smartest people, if I had not had great mentors, I would not be in RockCreek. And one last thing, sorry to be so long-winded, is the RockCreek Advisory Board has some of the, I think, most incredible people on it. We have Alan Greenspan, who actually sits right next to my office when we were in the office, and hopefully very soon in a month or two. We also have had Deanne Julius, who actually was my first boss when I worked on energy at the World Bank. And she's Dame Julius now. She lives in England. She was chief economist at Shell and British Airways, and a great mentor to me. Jessica Einhorn, who was the first woman treasurer of the World Bank, and brought me into the finance area of the World Bank, and I learned a lot from her. She's on the board of BlackRock. She was dean at SAI, so she's had this incredible career where she's been in academia, she's been in finance, she's been in public sector, and many others. But the point is that it is, when I met them, none of those things had happened. So I think choose people you like and you admire, and whose values you admire, and you can, you know, you can only learn from them.
That's so fantastic. And, you know, what I really hear a lot of is about how you really celebrate diversity of backgrounds and perspectives. And I've read about how much that that value system is emphasized within RockCreek. And so can you talk about why that's so important in investing and how you were able to sort of develop that culture?
So, Leena, I think that if you look at actual numbers at RockCreek, more than 80% of our team, whether you look at ownership, management, all staff, if you look at really any metric, and you mentioned metrics earlier, which I want to come back to at some point, is diverse. And what did diversity mean? Meant that we have people from very different backgrounds, whether it is race, whether it is gender, whether it is sexual orientation, whether it is, you know, people who've been, you know, veterans, people who've done really lots of different things in their lives. And so that means also people who are born in different places. And I think that brings a lot of wealth of information. And if you're investing globally and if you're looking at opportunities, that really helps. Secondly, we also are big investors in ESG, climate, health, education, etc. And I think maybe it just goes together. If you're more diverse, maybe you're just more open to new ideas. And we have been able to find areas of investment that are very high return, but also are investments that you're proud to do and sort of fit our value system. And that's why it's not a choice between financial returns and, doing interesting things that help society. And coming back to diversity, we started investing in early talent. And we used to do that at the World Bank. We started doing that at RockCreek. And a lot of early talent happen to be diverse, women who start venture funds with just a small amount, Black entrepreneurs who start, small companies. And so as we speak, we have invested more than 6.5 billion since we started RockCreek in diverse firms. And that is funds, firms, and entrepreneurs, who have started their company. And by the way, the metric, again, going back to your point about metrics, this is by ownership. If we started broadening the metrics to include, just management teams within big companies that are diverse, it would be a bigger number. And what we found is that as we did this, we did a study with IFC, and I would love to see your white paper, by the way, on this topic. We looked at 700 funds, private equity and venture funds in emerging markets. And as you can imagine, IFC probably has the best database. We have a pretty good one, but what they have is really next to none when it comes to private equity, venture, but investing in emerging markets. And they had required their investors to keep information on ESG, but also on gender. And we looked at gender. Obviously, you have a diverse group of people investing in Africa, Latin America, Asia, etc. Number one finding, more women GPs in emerging markets than the US. Shocking, right? So for those of you MBA students who want to start your own fund, you should look at this study. I strongly recommend it because it shows that the gender balance teams, which meant 30% of one gender or another represented, were earning 15 to 20% higher return. And this is not sort of a touchy-feely thing. This is data over 20 years, 700 funds. Oliver Wyman worked with us to make sure that data quality and independence and all the metrics were done in a very correct way methodologically. So that is pretty huge. And of course, as you would expect, not only the returns were higher, those funds were also more likely to invest in more diverse teams. So diversity, if you're diverse, going back to your point about RockCreek, you also are it's probably easier to find talent that is diverse and to invest with them. And in our experience, our own data is consistent with other data you see that is resulting in much higher return.
Thank you so much for diving into that. You actually answered one of our questions, which was trying to understand this report on gender balance. So now let's talk more about your career that expands across the globe. And I know I'm personally curious to know, what do you believe are the biggest deterrents to women in the field of finance and progressing to higher levels?
I think sometimes our, I don't want to say worst enemies, but people who deter us sometimes start with ourselves, in the sense that we are not sure if we can do certain things. And I think for any of us, really anything is possible. It's really a question not just of the efforts you put in, but also, like I said, it's not like I did not have bad experiences. I was, I've mentioned some of my good experiences and some of the women I work with. I also work with men or women who are not necessarily very conducive to my, happiness and thriving in my work and life. And so I think it's really important to not get stuck, because it's so easy to say, maybe I'm not good, or maybe it's, and just sort of put up with things that you think are not right, whatever kind of work environment that is not right. And I think the difference between today and maybe even 5 years ago or 10 years ago, remember in the CVs, they used to say, if you're jumping around too much, not good. And they meant like, if you moved every 5 years, it was not good, right? I mean, I've had very few jobs in my career, but that was within those jobs, I did a lot of different things. And I think I would really encourage you, if you're in a great environment, wonderful. If you're in an environment you're not thriving, do not stay there. So I think that is one thing that is up to us. And people say, well, but then how do I make sure that I'm getting paid and things like that? And that is a real concern. You can't just say lean forward or lean backward and the world will be fine for everybody. It is a hard world out there. The only difference, again, for those of you who are getting out into the workplace today, it's very different than if you got out in the workplace in 2008. There's going to be so much demand for each one of you. And look at 1.9 trillion going out as we speak, another few trillion going out for infrastructure and investing in human capital. I mean, that's historically really unheard of, right? So you're going to be going into this kind of a marketplace, which is a very different marketplace than anybody has been in for a very, very long time. So you really can choose. And that's why I think it's very different no matter what people's jobs are, in blue collar, in white collar, in finance, in technology, etc., where there is a lot more option. The second thing is speak up, but always respectfully. Again, most of us have been brought up to be very diplomatic and not to speak up. And I think I find it easier to speak up now. But I have to tell you, as a woman who runs a fairly successful financial firm, I mean, by all metrics, performance, growth, etc., we're very successful. Even today, I wouldn't say it's easier than it was 15 years ago when we started the firm. It is still difficult. And I think the problem with that is the unconscious bias that has, been there, even for people who are making the right speeches, even for people who are saying the right things. When it comes to actual action, they're slow. And it is really up to you to press them. And that's why, Lauren, you and given your own work teaching and working on data and IT before you even got to the MBA, and what Lauren has done and is doing and going to do, I really encourage you. Data is really, really important, and data will speak for itself. So make sure whatever you're doing, keep the data and make sure it speaks for you, because that will be your best way to demonstrate the points that we're talking about today.
Fantastic. We are going to run out of time, so we have two last questions. And one thing that I'm really fascinated about is moments of transition, whether that be from job to job, career to career. And specifically for us as MBAs, we are in a moment of transition. And I'd love to know, as you reflect back on your life and your career and those moments of your transitions, is there anything you wish you would have known that you can impart onto us as we move into our next transition?
Great question, Leena. And in terms of transitions, generally, I have to tell you something about me, which is I like change. So for me, transitions have always been something I look forward to. I'm very close with a lot of friends where transitions are not, they are more worried about transitions. So we all approach transitions differently, right? And we should be respectful of that. So, my experience doesn't necessarily transcend to others. But I think one of the most important transitions that was interesting for me is when I went to finance, and at the same time, as I was changing jobs, I had my first child. And so that was a lot of transition, having, a big change in your home life. And I think the one thing that was very interesting, again, this is a question of time. And I spent a lot of time with my kids, but also my jobs always had a lot of travel. And, again, thanks to Zoom now, I think life will be different for people post-COVID in terms of not necessarily traveling when you don't need to travel, but there's so many more options. Really think about your whole life. And I think your generation, and I know that at Georgetown and with Reena and all the great role models that you've got there, you're much more balanced. So have the transitions in life be much more balanced than some of us have done in the past. So I would say my one lesson is that when I look back, I wish I was more balanced in terms of my approach to my kids, my family, and my work, and that, you can prioritize all at the same time as well as possible. So.
Thank you for that. And we want to also end on a really positive note. So as we celebrate Women's History Month, we want to know from you, Mrs. Beschloss, what gives you the most hope?
I think what gives me most hope, Lauren, is people like yourself, you and Leena, and many of the students out there. I really, really feel very positive about where we are today, politically, academically, technologically. And I just really feel very strongly that you have so many options. And if I could just say one thing, the other reason I'm very optimistic is the world has brought what we used to call externalities, like, air and water have no value and finance has value. All of finance now knows that all those things have value. Your generation knows that everything has value. So I have a lot of hope, and I'm very excited at this time that youth and your generation is really, truly in a place to make the world a lot better.
I love that. And I am someone who's actually very interested in going into blockchain technologies, which is valuing these sorts of usually assets that we have not valued in the past. So I want to really thank you for being here. And on behalf of Georgetown University and the Center for Financial Markets and Policy, we would all like to thank you for joining us today to learn from your experiences as a woman leader in business. And it has truly been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you.
It's been my honor. And thank you again, Leena and Laura. And thank you very much, Reena, for inviting me. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you for everything you do every day for Georgetown, Reena. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Afsaneh. This has been an absolutely wonderful, I've been fascinated by hearing about your story, and thank you for what you're doing for Georgetown and serving on our board of directors. We really appreciate it. Leena and Lauren, thank you so much. You did a terrific job.